All right, good afternoon. Welcome to the Thurston County Board of County Commissioners Board Work Session for Wednesday, March 27, 2024. It is 2:02 p.m. My name is Ty Mentor, Chair of the Board. Commissioner Fournier, Vice Chair, will be joining us in a few moments. We have Commissioner Carolina Mejia, Commissioner Gary Edwards, and Commissioner Emily Klaus. For public virtual attendance, you may follow along on the Thurston County YouTube channel. Seated here at the moment is Interim County Manager Robin Campbell and Assistant County Manager Rob Gelder. And we've got various staff members, as well as folks related to the various topics we're dealing with today. First topic up is Department of Natural Resources Land Management discussion. It's not a specified period of time, although we do have to cover the other couple things. So it looks like 60, 75
an hour or so, yeah.
Is kind of what we have. And this is a follow-up to a letter received from Department of Natural Resources in, I want to say December, or November, December, inviting this follow-up conversation to conversations we've had earlier in 2023. So I know I saw DNR folks behind me. You've got at least 5 spots to bring up folks. And we'll do introductions.
So Donnie?
And here's Commissioner Fournier. Dwayne, I know you best. Why don't you introduce your team?
Sure. Good morning, Commissioner Mentor and members of the board. For the record, my name is Dwayne Emmons. I'm the Assistant Deputy Supervisor for State Uplands.
Hi,
Sarah?
folks. Sarah Ogden, Trust Outreach Specialist for DNR.
Brandon Mueller, South Puget Sound Assistant Regional Manager.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Don Melton. I'm the South Puget Sound Regional Manager for DNR.
Okay. Well, we thank you for being here. Kind of what we thought is I would go over some comments that I've kind of run by the board preliminarily. I'll open it up to my seatmates to add anything that they want to supplement what I say. And then we kind of, see if you guys have thoughts about ways to move forward on the various things that I kind of outlined. And then we'll just see how much we can get through in the time we have.
And I would just mention that we have a slightly expanded agenda for this work session specifically about the DNRI.
Yeah, those were just, came from an outline that had been circulated. So I'll just start off, just kind of, because I know a lot of people are watching this. This is an issue of great interest in our community. Thurston County started with a very strong community request to take steps, if we could, to protect the remaining mature and complex pieces of forest in Capital State Forest, Thurston County side of Capital State Forest. Our understanding is that we have something like 1,900 acres of unprotected mature complex forest in Thurston County Capital State Forest, which, depending on how you crunch the numbers, and you guys know this better than me, but it's something like 4%. We have a Thurston Climate Mitigation Plan where we, you may not know about it. It's a countywide effort from all the jurisdictions to put elected officials and resources toward an implementation plan. We couldn't quite get to our carbon sequestration targets without relying on, to our greenhouse gas reduction targets without relying on carbon sequestration. So we are concerned about how reductions from the baseline that we were using might affect that plan and all the resources that are going into that plan. I know a letter has gone to either DNR or BNR or both from the climate mitigation group, which I served on in the past, but I do not now. We have multiple community goals that we're hearing about: wildlife habitat, the recreation groups, the stormwater effects, all these things you're aware of. I know you've seen them. I've seen letters from King County and Snohomish County and Jefferson County, so I'm not going to talk about those, but those are all things that we hear about here in Thurston County as well. The small percentage of lands, there's always discussion about beneficiaries, but if the number is 4% or whatever it is, that aggregate impact to our beneficiaries, especially if any mitigating approaches can be taken, we think is manageable. I've spoken to the 2 largest beneficiaries, representatives from the port and the library, and some of the schools. Not every single one, but some of them, about what we're doing and why we're doing it and the scale that we're talking about, and they haven't expressed any major concerns about that. Seems like that the recent Supreme Court case that everybody talks about seems to at least it would be okay for the DNR to manage lands for multiple community goals in the way that we've outlined. Even though you're not required to necessarily, but it seems to fit. And there's the recent letter from Board of Natural Resources member Rakedahl that kind of touches on that. I wanted to point out, because this has come up, it's really not important to us what kind of land it is. Our goal has always been to protect the last remaining mature forest acres, whatever the legal status of that land. We aren't looking to reconvey county transfer lands and make parks, like something like what Wacom did, or create county-managed community forests, or to create our own local carbon project, which is something that Jefferson, I know, explored. You guys are the experts in land management. We want you to continue to do it, and you're resourced for it. But we just wanted to hopefully take into account our county's goals on this, what we feel is a modest request, given the amount of acres at issue. We have a letter then from, so this has been an ongoing conversation. We have a letter from Commissioner Franz on June 7th, 2023, where she invited us to work with her team on a strategy for how DNR manages the trust lands in our county. We were excited about that, and we did have one session in September related to that. At the same time, in the last two legislative sessions, we've had the legislature formally recognizing the value of mature complex forest lands and allocating money from the Climate Commitment Act toward purchase of lands that could be swapped out for those lands. So we have all that backdrop. And yet with all of that backdrop, it's come to my attention that as of late 2023, 10 of the next 12 parcels scheduled for cut in Capital State Forest in Thurston County involve all or half or more of these mature complex pieces that we've identified. Essentially 1,200 of the 1,900 acres that we're talking about trying to conserve would be gone by mid-2025, according to the schedule that you guys had at the end of 2023. So it's been, I'll be blunt, it's been infuriating, it's been mystifying to have a letter from the Commissioner of Land saying, let's work on your goals. We've been really clear from the beginning what our goals are. And then to have this aggressive schedule toward these parcels. There's lots of other land in Capital State Forest to cut. It's been brought, I've been given multiple analyses from multiple sources, but it seems like there's 10 to 15 years worth of timber harvestable other lands besides these particular older parcels that could be essentially reordered so that we could work on these different things that we're told we can work on. For example, we formally requested inclusion in the Commissioner's Phase 2 carbon project. We got no parcels in that request. We formally requested inclusion in the 2,000 acres that were resourced by the Climate Commitment Act. I call it the SWAP program. We were not given that. You guys gave justifications for that. I've written them all down. I'd like to talk about how we can work through those. So our efforts over the last 2 years from our perspective have really accomplished nothing towards our community's goals. We need some kind of solution going forward. If we don't know why DNR wasn't a full-throated partner behind the additional lands to be for the SWAP program. I mean, this helps us get to our goals and keeps you guys whole, doing what you do in the way that you do it. It seemed like the perfect solution, but I'm not at the legislature every day. My understanding was, if not opposition, there was not much support from you guys about that. So that, again, undermines this idea that we're working together towards some common goals. If we can't come to an agreement about not cutting these last 1,900 acres, we would at an absolute minimum want to talk about a reordering of the scheduled cuts so that we can delay these cuts for a substantial period of time so that we can work on the different tools and changes. This is a fast-changing area, as evidenced by the last two legislative sessions. So in terms of my last piece of my part is just, the things that I've heard about is why has Capital State Forest been passed over for different things? One I heard about is connectivity. Well, that came up in the last letter about the 2,000 acres. Well, we prioritized pieces that were connected to other bigger federal parcels, and you guys are all, it's like, I get it, but it's kind of a slap in the face. Like, we've chopped you up so bad and you have such little left that it doesn't matter anymore. And that's not how our community feels about those remaining parcels. We've done, some groups have done some mapping and we've looked at these, and we're gonna have presentations to the board on them about, how to look at Capital State Forest and create larger pieces, connecting older, they may not be as complex or structurally complex as we'd like to see, as the ones we're really focusing on, but if we're looking at trying to connect larger pieces, how could that be done logically? We're working through that. Is that a good thing for us to be doing? Tell us if that's a no-go. The trust repayment issue has come up. Now, again, Mr. Emmons and I think some public comment, I've heard secondhand that, we talked about this in our field visit on Juneau, and my understanding was that the reconciliation audit has to happen no later than 2030. Well, if it's no later than, could it happen now? Have the values increased? Has enough cutting been done that we could speed that up and see where we're at on that? To see if maybe that burden that I understood, I didn't quite understand why, but you explained it on the field visit, is totally on the back of Capital State Forest for that trust repayment. Is there a way to get out from under that sooner than 2030? I don't know how that would work. So that's a question I have. When we took that field visit and I brought up some of these issues, it was explained by, I think, your historian or one of your scientists that the Capital State Forest, there was a pushback to the notion that there even was structurally complex carbon dense forest in Capital State Forest because based on age of like pre-World War II, because it was said that it's been clear cut consistently since the beginning of the century. And again, there's been ground truthing of where these parcels exist, and I've been taken out on field visits to at least 4 of them. So to ground truth, the ground truthing. So I know there isn't a lot, but there is some, and it matters to our community. So that's, another thing I want to be able to talk through because I don't want that just to be a defense. Like, you don't have it, don't worry about it. You don't have what you think you have. That's not what I've seen with my eyes. Finally, and I know this is a lot, and we're probably not going to get to most of it, but I just want to kind of lay it all out. The Cabbage Patch sale that was delayed till the fall to see if Thurston County had a plan. I wasn't able to attend that meeting, but I'm wondering what is meant by a plan. At a recent Timber County's caucus meeting at Wasac I went to, Board of Natural Resources member Janicki said, well, we want to see if Thurston County wants to create a community forest or something. So we don't want to create a community forest, so we need to know what you mean. I mean, I'm happy to do whatever it is that you want us to do, but I don't quite know what is meant by that. And maybe that's a question for Board of Natural Resources members and you can't answer it, but it's just something that's come up in trying to figure out what can we do to most effectively accomplish some piece of what our community is asking us for? I mean, we may not get everything we want, but so far I feel like a quarter of my time I wasn't elected to do this. And I feel like I've spent a quarter of my time trying to do something and accomplish nothing. And I don't feel very good about that. So I feel like I'm barking up the wrong trees. If you guys can't do anything because of legal requirements, then help us figure out what we need to ask our legislators for. Some flexibility that's not there, but we've got to get somewhere. I can't keep doing what I've been doing and getting the non-result that I've been getting. That's my kind of opening. And I'll leave it up to my seatmates to ask or pose any other questions or comments you might have.
I think they've got it. From my perspective, they've been given enough to respond to for now. I don't want to throw anything else on there.
I won't really add much to what has already been said. I think Commissioner Menser covered the sentiment very well and very thoroughly. But I really, that last piece is one of the ones because we have a timeline set forward where we need to come up with a plan to present. And so I think it's important for us to really understand what that means, what it entails, what we actually need to present. What does it mean by a plan? If we present a proposal, like, is there a timeline attached to that proposal? Like, what is it exactly? I would really like to be walked through that and see what our options are. And I think that's been, for me, one of the things that I've struggled is what are our options when it comes to us making this request to protect these 1,900 acres? Like, what is it that we can actually do? Is our only option taking it on? I think we just need to have that laid out clearly for us to understand.
I think I'd just say from our perspective, it's kind of a team effort, I guess, but you've heard from the captain already. He's pretty dedicated to the cause. And my concern is more around schools and fire departments and junior taxing districts and how that might adversely affect them. And if so, what can we do to make them whole? So I'll keep it to that bare amount because your plate's pretty full, I think, right now, so.
I guess we will say something, but like, you know, you've heard about the county's objectives. You all have objectives too. And I'm really interested in maybe where they align and how we can work together to, you know, accomplish the goal. Because you guys, you know, you've got your charge and you've got your things that you need to do. And of course, you know, part of that is harvesting something to be able to provide revenue for these junior taxing districts. And, you know, I think that's important and I'd love to hear about that as well. But like, I guess, what are your goals? What is your mandate? What do you do? And how can we try to align ourselves and find positive results?
Commissioner Claus.
I would just echo everything that Commissioner Mensah has said. I'm still learning a lot about this topic, so having the history and the context really helps a lot, but I'm mostly just here to kind of listen and learn and, as Commissioner Fournier said, see where some of our goals align so that we can hopefully accomplish finding some happy medium. I think Commissioner Mensah laid out pretty solid plan for like, this is where we want to start, how can we move forward, and so yeah, I'm mostly just here to listen and learn.
Great. And I promise security checked me. I have no PowerPoints with me this time. So it's good to just have the discussion and have the, you know, the questions back and forth. And so I'll try and answer in an order that kind of helps to frame. You know, so first, you know, kind of that authorizing environment, you know, what we do, why we do, and, you know, what we can and can't do. So as we've talked about before, and we'll just use Capital Forest as the example, but it's a statewide example. We have the various trust beneficiaries that we're managing these trusts for. And they are true fiduciary trusts. We have those duties of undivided loyalty, in perpetuity, for current and future beneficiaries, et cetera, et cetera. It is no different, and in fact, it is exactly the same trusts that the State Investment Board manages for some of the permanent funds. When we generate revenue for some of the beneficiaries, it doesn't go directly to the beneficiary, it goes to a permanent fund. And the State Investment Board manages then those liquid assets, and they have that same duty of undivided loyalty, of intergenerational equity, of prudent management and care, et cetera. The Conservation Northwest case, the Supreme Court case, in fact, determined that these are true fiduciary trusts. In the past, the courts had looked at other aspects of trust management, Skamania v. State and other court precedent, had used other states' enabling acts and other court precedent to say these are fiduciary trusts, but the court looked at our enabling act in our state constitution and said, yes, these are true fiduciary trusts. It was a unanimous decision, 8-0, in our favor. So it didn't overturn any laws, it didn't overturn any statutes, it didn't overturn any of the board's decisions, it affirmed all of them. It said, yes, we have that duty of reasonable skill and care. We don't have to maximize revenue. What the court said was, there will be a point, the court won't step in to look at, do you conserve 52%, do you conserve 48%? That's up to the discretion of the department and the legislature. When the court will step in is when we breach our fiduciary duty. And so, again, they affirmed that. That being said, our argument was we don't maximize revenue. That's why we have a habitat conservation plan. That's why we've set aside an area twice the size of Thurston County for conservation across Western Washington, because we're not just trying to maximize revenue. So that really gets to those sideboards. We still have to follow the Multiple Use Act, which says you can, and the department's directed to achieve multiple uses, recreation, visual quality, other purposes, so long as it doesn't violate that trust responsibility.
I'm sorry, how you want to manage questions? Is it okay?
Yeah, no,
If I ask them?
Yep.
So since we're on that topic, so two things that just come into mind. One is, man, using the HCP as an example, like, the HCP is to not violate the Endangered Species Act.
right.
So I mean, that's not like using discretion and flexibility and community goals, like, discretionary decisions. That's like, you can't, I mean, I know you had options as to how to structure the HCP, but you had to come up with one solution. And trust us, we know about the
Right.
HCP and the ESA.
Yep.
So there, I just want to make that point. I mean, that, just saying, well, obviously we don't maximize revenue, we have an HCP. Well, you do I mean, if that's the only thing you've got going, then you are maximizing revenue, but for the fact that you'd be violating the law to go any further and maximize revenue. So that's not quite the same. And the second thing I wanted to ask is what, and you may get to this, but in this maximizing revenue concept, how does that play into who sets the order of cutting, like what parcels at what time? And what flexibility is there? And how does that play into what your vision of your duties to your trust?
Right.
And I can take that one just real
Sure.
quick. I mean, the reality is that the scheduling and things like that, that is all based off of high-level policy that the board delivers to us, right? The Board of Natural Resources, I should say.
Yep.
And, there's a lot of different things that go into that, from marketing to, and Brandon, you can help me out here too, but, we can't just focus on this one spot because of all these different green up issues that we have and things like that. But the very high level is how we get there, is from direction from the Board of Natural Resources.
And they've told you to cut the 1,200 of the,
Via policy and the current policy and procedure, yes.
what do you mean by current policy? Like, what does it say, what did they say specifically that led to those cuts being identified?
Yeah, so the sustainable harvest calculation, right, is one part of that,
That's a number of acres.
correct? It's actually it's a timber volume,
Yeah.
is what it is.
Okay, but that doesn't tell you which parcels to get that volume within Capital State Forest you would choose in what order.
That, we do have flexibility within that, yes, you're absolutely right.
So if you agreed with me that, if you guys walked out of this meeting saying, you know what, Commissioner Mensah, pretty reasonable request, let's not cut those 1,900 acres until we have to, based
Sure.
on just rotation. You have that latitude to reorder those?
We have a little bit of latitude there, and we have. I mean, there's, I don't know how many sales that are, we've paused right now, until we can have these conversations. I just don't have the numbers in front of me.
And several we've put into the initial carbon, project as well, so the Oracle and Silent Hill timber sales. And then as Dawn mentioned, so we have all different constraints, green up issues where you can't harvest an adjacent stand until it's at a certain age or a certain height. Rain on snow, where we have to have a certain percentage in, mature forest. So lots of different constraints that kind of guide us into certain places. And a lot of these stands were on hold for the Miralette, so they're sat there for 20 years and now they're on base. And we have a pretty large deliverable in Capitol Forest that we, have to achieve, based on our trust mandates. And so we're not targeting any specific sales, just trying to hit our annual deliverable of 59 million board feet in Capitol Forest.
So, I mean, that makes sense to me, and I just wanted to confirm, so when you're like planning this out, you're looking more at the trees and the forest management guiding you, not saying, you don't have a spreadsheet of beneficiaries and go, oh, well, Griffin School District didn't get any for a few years, so we gotta cut these trees. Like, it's not driven by the receivers, it's driven by the proper way to manage a forest. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
It just may turn out that one beneficiary gets a lot in a certain
Yes.
few years and then doesn't get any for a long time because the forest just drives it that way.
And historically, it kind of harvested in the middle and then it got pushed to the outside. So now a lot of our harvests are on the outside. There's some mixed in, but that's historically how they harvested.
Yeah, so some of these decisions are driven by decisions that were made 70 years ago.
Right.
When you identified the section line and logged to the next section line, right? And so you have areas that haven't reached maturity yet. So again, to go back, to kind of frame, we by statute have to set a sustainable harvest level every decade. And that's based on then what is the volume that would be available for harvest. And so that's a standard modeling exercise that, you know, all large forest landowners do. You have to look at what your inventory is, you have to look at the expected growth, you have to look at constraints. So what areas do we have set aside so that we're not harvesting, you know, unstable slopes, as Brandon mentioned, rain on snow areas where you don't want to harvest a lot of the area that gets snow in the winter and rain because that can cause unseasonal flooding. I said unstable slopes, any habitat areas, et cetera. And so then you calculate and we set a sustainable harvest level. As Brandon also mentioned, we spent over a decade working to amend our habitat conservation plan for greater protection for marble murrelet. And so so as not to forego future options, a lot of our lands that had older mature forests were off base because we didn't know, were we gonna put those large, reserves for murrelet protection in parts of Capitol Forest, in parts of Whatcom County, in parts of Skamania County, et cetera. And again, that's a contract and an amendment with the federal services. So that's U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and U.S. Marine Fisheries Service to come to an agreement on where those areas were going to be placed. And so as we worked in our other areas to meet those those fiduciary duties, we were harvesting the areas that were younger and on base. And so a result of that is now it's more of the older timber that the board, when they made that final decision in 2019 to set more lands aside, over 35,000 acres of additional lands were set aside. Lands were then determined to be on base for harvest. And so that's where we're operating. Now, it seems like we're targeting those lands. I'll be frank. All of the environmental community and the purchasing community, they do public disclosure requests. They ask us for our GIS data for our timber harvest plan. So we're not targeting areas that they've identified. They're identifying the areas that we had planned for harvest. There are other lands within Capitol Forest that are, would meet our definition of structural complexity. They didn't have a timber sale plan, so you haven't been bombarded with emails about them. But there are other areas within Capitol Forest that when we did our work looking at potential areas for the 2,000 acres, we identified lands in different counties. We identified lands in Thurston County that had the potential to be set aside for that 2,000 acres. The commissioner ultimately made the choice of, which ones and where. And like we said, we did look to get the most bang for the buck. If we were gonna conserve 200 acres, if it was in between two parcels of murrelet habitat, it made more sense to protect than that 200 acres to get one large contiguous block that would then develop into murrelet habitat. So that's where we ultimately chose areas to attempt to do that.
Can I
Yeah,
ask
sorry, Commissioner.
How many acreage do you have that meets that definition for DNR for?
I don't know offhand exactly how many acres would meet our definition of structurally complex. And I will say we have an official definition of what is structurally complex. It is not simply stands that were harvested prior to 1945. Structural complexity, and these are developed by not only our internal scientists, but by Dr. Jerry Franklin, Dr. Norm Johnson, Dr. Robert Van Pelt, University of Washington, OSU professors that are, I think, mostly all retired now, but basically the experts in old growth ecology in Washington. They literally wrote the book, Ecological Forest Management. And so we use those definitions. Those are defined by the Board of Natural Resources, our definitions of structurally complex forests.
In September, though, one of your slides, when you had a PowerPoint, you had what you were walking through things, and I think at that point, your slide, you would walk through, and you said there was like 2,100 acres. And I took 200 off of that because I think there's been a couple.
Yeah, I will have to see. I know there was.
I'm just saying, I think they match, actually.
I'll have to go back and review. I know we had areas that were in conservation and et cetera, et cetera. I know there was the letter from Stephen Kropp that had identified about 2,100 acres at that time of what, you know.
I remember being
they call-
relieved that we were talking apples to apples, because your number matched what some of
Yeah,
the other folks
I,
were.
I'll have to review. It may have been that I was referencing that number. But yeah, I
Go
can
ahead,
circle back there.
As we talk about stands that we keep, for an example, how much of that of Capitol Forest is in Grays Harbor versus Thurston County?
I don't have that number in front of me.
You probably would have it if you had.
If I had a PowerPoint. It might have been in a prior PowerPoint, but I think Capitol Forest, it's almost divided in.
It's
Very
roughly
close to
half.
split in half.
Okay, and I guess what I'm wondering about is everything, are you trying to balance, say, just for our concerns, or are you trying to watch for other counties? So, could we get a benefit even though maybe it's something that you're saving that's in Grays Harbor County in close proximity to us, for an example? I mean, that's just a thought, but
Right.
I'm kind of curious on, you're doing, your cutting is by the ton or by the board foot, by the species? How does that work out? And my concern is if you're gonna take so much off, and then you always have that, diseases like root rot and bugs or something that you have to manage around, because you have to take so much of that out to get it out, so it isn't spreading, is my understanding, and I could be wrong on that. And, do you leave any dead anymore? In the old days when I worked for Weyerhaeuser, we used to have to take everything down because you didn't want a tree in the bite,
Right.
But
Yep.
now I'm told you're leaving trees for birds. So there's kind of a trade-off there, is there? And do we get any credit for any of that where you might take a whole bug kill area? Or you might have new bug kill problems because of the warming situation, I suppose. I don't know.
Right.
I was down to Oregon the other day and they got a big die-off going on down there, but a little bit warmer. And so how does all that figure in so that you can kind of manage something, above and beyond what the junior taxing districts get? How do you equate that amount of property that you're gonna log that maybe you wouldn't log, but because of disease or whatever, you have to log it, or maybe you
Yeah,
fire? I don't know.
I'll talk a little bit, and then Brandon and Don can talk more on the operational level. But when we set that sustainable harvest level, right, Capitol Forest is its own sustainable harvest unit. So when we do the modeling, we include all of Capitol Forest as a unit. And so that includes both Grays Harbor and Thurston County lands. Other counties and other lands, for county, the trust lands we manage for the county and the junior taxing district beneficiaries, they are their own sustainable harvest unit. So in Thurston, you actually have two. You have Capitol Forest as its own unit because it's one large contiguous block of 100-and-something thousand acres. And then we also have other lands in Thurston County that are modeled separately, down in, around Tenino. And so that has its own set of deliverables. But we do incorporate, we don't know 10% could have root rot or forest health issues, what have you. We do build in a factor in our models that says, there's gonna be some, potential, fire damage, wind damage, et cetera, et cetera. So that's generally built in, but that goes to those individual choices. Our model doesn't say you're gonna go here and then you're gonna go here and here. It's not a tactical or an operational model. It's a strategic model that says within Capitol Forest, your growth is this, your constraints are this, and so your allowable harvest would be X. And then the region is given that deliverable, that your deliverable is, 20,000 board feet this year, or 100,000 board feet. 100 million board feet, sorry, I'm off by a decimal
I
point.
thought it was gonna be millions.
100 million board feet, whatever it is. So then, that goes to that continual on-the-ground assessment. This area has root rot. We should be harvesting this one now. Right, this one over here can.
Let me just interject a little bit. When you say you do have root rot, well, then that's more detrimental to Douglas fir. So do you put hemlock back in as your replacement stock?
Yeah, we'll
Or
replant
cedar?
with,
Cedar, usually we'll,
Cedar,
cedar. Sometimes hemlock, they are still susceptible, but typically we'll put cedar in root rot pockets.
Commissioner Edwards, on your first question about Grace Harbor, just so you know, like, when I throw numbers, I try to stick into my Thurston County only, Thurston County Lane. And if you look at the mapping of where mature forest part, it's very little of it is in Grace Harbor. There isn't much in Capital State Forest, and what there is almost all Thurston, from what I've seen.
So we can't get a benefit. I was trying to get a benefit maybe from Grace Harbor.
Yeah, I mean,
Because of the close
is that kind of
proximity.
like the fundamental issue here is like DNR saying, look, we've got an entire state we manage, and we've got policies that are responsible in our opinion. And look, we're even conserving an area larger than the entire Thurston County. And, you know, so we're doing all these things here, but you're looking at right here. Is that kind of the issue going on?
there, I mean, to me, there is some of that. And Capitol Forest spans both counties. The Cabbage Patch timber sales span both counties, because we don't look at what trust it's on. We don't look at the county border. We look at operationally what makes the most sense. It's along that road system. These four units logically would go together. And so most people, they don't know when they're driving through Capitol Forest where they've crossed the line from Grace Harbor or Thurston County. So in that respect, yes, if there were, areas that have been conserved in Grace Harbor within Capitol Forest, the public, that enjoys seeing that type of a landscape would get that benefit. But we also do recognize that within Thurston County, you have the desire, you can't go tell Grace Harbor County to conserve more, you can.
Well, and I don't want to interfere with Grace Harbor and their
Exactly.
relationship with their beneficiaries or any of that. I'm trying to try
Exactly.
to stay in my lane this
Stay-
entire
exactly,
time.
exactly.
I never advocated for anything at a state level but really just responding to the people that I hear from in my county.
Yeah, and so maybe to the broader point, we manage lands in every county and every legislative district in the state. So we are always looking at that statewide perspective, but a lot of these land use decisions are very local. And individual timber harvest, especially for county trust lands, is very place-based. If the timber harvest happens here on the state forest transfer lands, it may benefit the Rochester School District and, West Thurston Fire. Cross over that imaginary line, and it may benefit the Tumwater School District and I think maybe also still West Thurston Fire, but still, it's a different mix of junior taxing districts. So that imaginary line, has an impact.
Can I ask this? So going back to the order, the sequencing of the cuts, and I understand what you said about the HCP and these parcels were backburnered for 20 years, you said, and so now they're kind of at the front. But what would be like, obviously there's more than just those that are capable of being harvested, and you do have some flexibility, you said. So what would be from your, sitting in your shoes, what would be the downside, given how much ruckus we've raised, or however you want to say it, or how much, what would be the downside? Who are you harming? Is it just trying to get money to those beneficiaries that have been waiting for 20 years because those lands? Or what is it in your guys' head that would say that would be a problem to just do what we're asking and reorder those cuts? And not saying you won't cut them in the future, but just saying, given how much is going on in the legislature and how much, new stuff, we don't know if the Climate Commitment Act will survive. If it does, revenues are coming in strong. We may be able to replace more and more of these lands while we're trying to replace old growth forest over long periods of time. Climate science is rapidly evolving, and I learn new stuff about carbon sequestration every day. So in light of all that, what would be what's holding you back from
Right.
going ahead with that?
Yeah, so what I'll say, and I do want to go back to the Climate Commitment Act and the new legislative proviso, so that we can, all talk about that. But as I've mentioned, we have a 5-year plan, which is, we're gonna go probably somewhere here, we're gonna go somewhere over here, we're gonna go here, right? And it is, you have to have the moving pieces, you have to know that if I'm harvesting this, I have to wait 5 years before I can harvest the next area. And so you have to have that long-term look. And then we get to a 2-year plan. This is where I'm gonna be working this year, this is where I'm gonna be working next year. I have to get my geologist lined out, I need to have my archaeologist looking at it, I need my biologist looking at it. You have all of those moving pieces. So we are planning those sales 2 years out. It takes about 2 years to get a timber sale to our board. And so, as I said, groups that say, oh, you're working on that one, that's a legacy forest, set that aside. We've put 1.5 years worth of work into it. We can't just set that aside. We've spent trust money to get that revenue.
And it actually sounds like it affects another parcel for a period of time, possibly.
Yeah, if it's redraw the plan, the 5-year plan, the 2-year plan, the year plan, right? It's that investment that we've already put in to all of that work. So what I would say, that flexibility that we have is,
Couple years down the road.
well, and it's these conversations, because Don and Brandon are working on the 2006 or 2026 plan. They're working on the 27 plan, the 28 plan. So this would be that time to engage in those discussions and, have that. I think I've noted before, other counties, Clallam County, Jefferson County, Wahkiakum and Skamania, definitely, they need to know the revenue that's coming. But Clallam and Jefferson, they hold quarterly meetings with our region staff
Do you
to
think,
present those plans out
did you
front.
bring a plan with you to kind of get us out of your hair? I don't know if I use that right or not.
No offense either.
Anyway, did you
don't know
kind of
today
come
that
with an
we did.
idea that, hey, we'll offer this or something, this is about the best we can do? So we had some idea of, is there a solution at the end of whatever we're trying to do
Right.
here?
Yeah,
Wayne's got a question here.
So do you have information that you could provide us on the revenue forecast from, that it presents to Thurston County and the different taxing, are you able to share that with us?
yeah, we do have that. Sarah routinely has that, so we know
That's
that.
what you present to like Clallam County?
Right, exactly. These are the timber sales that are coming up in the next year or the next 2 years, and here's the anticipated revenue, et cetera, by tax district.
Yeah, and that's something that I would really like to get into the habit of, is just a quarterly meeting that we could talk about exactly that type of stuff, right? I think that we have this larger conversation that's happening now that we need to get through to get to that point. That's how I feel about it.
And then your decision-making, is it his turn?
I wanted to hear the answer to his question,
Oh.
but you jumped in.
Sorry.
But we can get back to it. It doesn't matter which order.
Yeah, so I guess the question was, do we have a work plan?
Plan, that's
But
what
I
I'm
don't know
looking
that we
for, yeah.
do here today.
Not with, I have a map showing the next few years of harvest, but not of like, can we shift this or that? We haven't looked into that. And as we kind of mentioned earlier, the procedures and constraints dictate where we go, and working with the unit foresters who are actually on the ground planning these 5-year plans, it's a yearly struggle for them to find out, where am I gonna hit my deliverable? So it's not like it's just abundantly, they can pick anywhere. I hear every year, it's like, I don't think we can get our deliverable. We're running out of, timber that we can harvest to meet the deliverable. So it's difficult for them. So it's definitely not, with all the constraints and HUP requirements and set-asides, it's tough to hit that volume. And again, so we're not targeting, any specific ones. We're hitting, what is available and what's on base for us. And if we were to shift to, say, like a warehouse or a 40-year stand, then we're tripling our acreage, so we're just increasing that footprint, so that increases, staff cost, just, everything kind of threefold there.
And one thing that I wanted to mention to you, it goes back to a comment that you had made earlier back when, sounds like you maybe had some interaction with Weyerhaeuser way back when and stuff like that. When we do look at a parcel, for harvest, it's not uncommon to have the general proposed area. And by the time we take out certain sections for riparian zones and unstable slopes and different types of habitats, that could be reduced anywhere from like 30 to sometimes 50% of what we were actually looking at. And then in addition to that, we're leaving at least 8 trees per acre on that too. So it's a lot different than some of like the private timberlands that you've seen.
Yeah, because you had mentioned about, what we're leaving behind, so as Don said, at least 8 trees per acre based on our harvest acreage, and then 30-40% is conserved around that timber sale. That'll be, permanently conserved.
So more like a seed tree, you're leaving seed trees, is that what?
Yeah, I
you're
mean,
doing?
it wouldn't be
Bird trees?
considered
What
a
do you-
seed tree, but yeah, I mean, sometimes they're clumped or individuals if they're large or if they got good, stuff.
What's your
for
general
birds.
loss on that? I mean, you get storm damage, because of exposure and.
It depends on the
50% of
aspect.
that eventually, or?
I don't know if it's that high. It's highly variable though, just because of,
Location.
And trying to clump them
Exactly.
usually, keeps them standing better. Try to avoid being close to roads and stuff because we'll get.
Well, do you think you guys could add up, that difference in the amount because of slope or riparian or whatever the save might be, does that meet what we're looking for? I don't know, or can it meet what we're looking
And,
for?
and we do that on every timber sale.
Well, yeah, but I mean, equate it somehow and see if we aren't getting somewhere to,
What, 8 trees of an acre, is how many are usually cut on an acre?
well, that's.
I know it's dependent on
Yeah, it's
species and all
super
that, but
variable.
let's just say
too.
your Douglas fir is your typical acre.
Yeah, again, very hard
100?
to say.
I don't know how many trees cut.
About
150,
120 trees per acre.
Commissioner Fournier.
Just so the decision-making, like legally for you guys, you've got obligations to trust beneficiaries, those junior taxing districts. You've got to deliver a certain amount of deliverables to meet those obligations. And if you don't do that, the trust beneficiaries will sue Department of Natural Resources, will sue the state. And they have a lot of legal standing to do so.
Yes.
Will and
You're gonna,
have,
and you're.
and currently are.
Yeah, and so you're kind of like, well, we're gonna get sued no matter what we do, whether it's by this nonprofit or the county or the beneficiaries. And then in your kind of legal devices, you're like, well, they've got the most standing legal beneficiaries, so we'll take on the potential lawsuits from anybody but them. Is that kind of how you guys?
Well, what we look at is what the Supreme Court and any other courts have held, right? And it is that we have that fiduciary duty. The Skamania v. State, an earlier lawsuit in the 80s, said on all of these lands, other objectives, no matter how laudable, cannot take the place of our duty to our beneficiaries. So, again, we can accommodate recreation, we accommodate visual quality. We have the regions, the field to have the discretion to add more than those 8 trees per acre if it's going to help with visual quality along a trail or in a neighborhood or what have you. There's a certain point where we have to say, does just deferring that breach that duty? So that's what we have to always look at. Yeah, again, that's why I see only 10 minutes. If we could talk another 3 hours just about variable density thinning and why we leave more than 8 trees
That's
per
where
acre and all of that.
that statement came between a rock and a hard place.
But I do want to
Yeah.
talk about the legislative proviso that did pass this last session. And so it is tied to the Climate Commitment Act. It doesn't go into effect until January 1st and is abolished if the Climate Commitment Act is repealed in December. But it provides just under $6 million to set aside more carbon-dense, structurally complex forest. In this proviso, the counties will provide parcels for nomination that then the Board of Natural Resources would approve. And it's specific to the Capitol State Forest, the Green Mountain State Forest in Kitsap County, the LB Hills State Forest in Pierce County, and the Stillaguamish Watershed in Snohomish County. And so, although that doesn't go into effect until January 1st, I would recommend that counties work on providing, you know, those nominated parcels before then, just so that, again, we know Thurston County's nominated, say, and I know in your earlier letter, you had provided a prioritized list, so the Star Wagon timber sale, the Chai
Does
timber
that
sale.
make the junior taxing districts whole?
This would,
That would,
because
yes.
what that does is it provides funding for us to buy replacement land. So,
Beneficiaries transfer,
sorry?
beneficiary sweep transfers to the new land.
Yes, if it's common school, that beneficiary, we buy land anywhere and it's easy, we can buy land anywhere in the state for the common school. If it's for, and I think the Chai and the Star Wagon timber sales are primarily county trust, 01 county transfer lands. I think both up around the Griffin School District, I think is the beneficiary.
Star Wagon's east
Yeah.
of Castle Lane.
But they would, what we would do is acquire new land. Then, even if we acquire land and the county participates in a land pool where potentially we acquire land in Jefferson County for Thurston and Jefferson and Whatcom and others to share as beneficiaries. When we generate the revenue, it would come back to the county and the county would then distribute that back to the same tax district.
Are we gonna be in the same situation though, where you choose still Aguamish and the other ones because we don't have the connectivity, the same criteria that were outlined in the letter telling us why we didn't get the last round that we asked for? Is that same argument's gonna come up? Are we gonna be
I
at the
will-
bottom of the barrel?
I will say no.
I know we're down to like identify, you know, like we're
No.
inching our way up, but there's still latitude in that proviso for you to say, not Thurston parcels.
It says that those counties will nominate and then the board will decide. I will say, I think the board has indicated that they're, you know, the reason they pulled back those units of the Cabbage Patch timber sale was to help facilitate that, because Jim Cahill, board member representing the governor, but also Office of Financial Management, you know, said, hey, look, the legislature's still in session, there's the potential for that legislative proviso. So that's one that it keeps the beneficiary whole because we're buying replacement land now.
Because they're acutely aware
It-
of everything
That's
going
why we
on in
put-
this room.
And that's why we put that,
Yeah.
you know, we could have said a dozen different things in our legislative priorities. That was our number 2 priority because it seemed to meet
Right,
all
it
of our
does.
interests in the best way. And
It-
not disrupt what you guys do, but get us where we need to go.
I will note, it has a short-term impact on those beneficiaries. If that sale was planned for 2026, the land that we're gonna buy is likely gonna be younger timber.
Yeah.
So it won't be available for harvest for, you know, a few decades.
And
But-
the other thing, sorry, Dwayne, I
Yeah.
didn't want to cut you off, but it's good. It meets multiple, you know, objectives and things like that. But in compared to the lands that you're looking at, I mean, it's a pretty small percentage, right? You know, because it's what, $6 million? And so that, depending on land values, that's a couple hundred acres, right? It's not 1,900 acres.
We were asking for a lot more money.
No,
last year,
I'm
yeah.
aware. I'm
Yeah.
just letting you
Get 'em
know
all.
that it's not the end all be
Commissioner
all.
McGee, you had your hand up for a while, sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
I just wanted to go back. I have two questions. I know that we're limited on time. The first one is just a clarification, because in an earlier statement, you said cuts are not guided by the beneficiaries, but by forest management. And so, like, I'm just trying to get some clarification on it, because then you're saying that, you know, you have this, you know, you have this duty to, like, follow that track. So, like, how are they then guided? Is it by the beneficiaries or not? And then just as a second before you answer is, I do want to touch on kind of that last part, because I know we're limited on time on that last letter that we received from the board. I just want to be sure that we touch on that and get some clarification on what it means for us to have a plan, and how we move forward on that. Because I think we really need to know that as we have our own conversations on how we're going to proceed.
Yeah, because one of our plans could be put it in, just what you said.
Right.
But they wanted it by October, and this doesn't go into effect till January, so there's a gap.
Right, yeah.
So we don't have it locked down in October, they cut, oh, it's too late, Cabbage Patch gone. I mean, is
Right.
that where we're at?
Right. So a couple things. When I talk about we're applying to the beneficiaries and the county properties, that's when we're operationally laying that timber sale out. So we will look at, okay, is there a forest health issue over here that would take priority over something in an adjacent stand, and does it make sense to harvest that first? So the field staff, they aren't going out in the field with a trust map and saying, I gotta find some of Trust 01. Now, they do when they have a deliverable for Thurston County Trust 01 outside of Capitol Forest. They do have to find and harvest in that sustainable harvest level.
Something somewhere.
Right, the 20 million board feet out of that trust in Tenino. But it doesn't dictate on the ground, I'm gonna go here versus here. And again, they're managing across boundaries. We will often have timber sales, especially in Capitol Forest, that have 2 counties and 3 different trusts. Just because operationally it made sense to do that. To your second question about the plan, one, I recognize that letter was sent before the budget proviso passed, so we were all hoping, and I told the legislature, I can buy replacement land next week. We have land being held for us in Wahkiakum County, so give me the money now. They chose not to. But I think that plan would be, it would be this is the approach that we're hoping to take. We are hoping to use reconveyance to set aside those parcels, and we have a plan for a community park for the area around Cabbage Patch, or the area around Star Wagon and Chai, or what have you. I think we've talked before about reconveyance. It has to be, it's those
So
state
you're saying for the
forest
reconveyance
transfer
to
lands.
occur, we have to have a plan on what to do with that property being
Yes.
reconveyed?
Yeah, you do, it has to comply with, or it has to be part of the statewide recreation plan. Though most of Capitol Forest allows for recreation, so it doesn't have to be, I would say, we have a parks plan, and this is on page 15 of the parks plan. I think it is we intend to seek reconveyance on that property to incorporate it into a park, et cetera. And then the board would say, okay, they've said they want to, pursue reconveyance.
Could we say, we intend to nominate this parcel in January, provided the voters is that, you just said that would be.
Yes,
I
yes.
mean, it's not the plan maybe they were thinking of, because you were saying that.
Right, no,
That's what had to pass. But would it be, and I know I'm asking you to put your brain in the Board of Natural Resources, but.
Potentially they could. Now, I will have to note one wrinkle. In that proviso, it does say that any areas that have an approved forest practices application as of March 5th cannot be requested.
And we weren't sure we weren't sure when a forest practices application gets, so how many different
Yeah,
scheduled.
any of
cuts
those
are in
that, right, so I do know that the Star Wagon and Chai, which were your 1 and 2 priority, don't have a forest practice application because they're planned in 25 and 26. Bears, Evergreen Gold, and a couple of others, well above 250, 300 acres, do not have forest practice applications.
So we might not be able to do Cabbage Patch though,
Correct.
in that, for
Yeah,
that,
not for
even
that
if it,
proviso.
even if it gets re-upped.
Right.
If there's a reconveyance, does the county have to pay DNR back for the 40 past years of management and projected revenues or
No.
anything to that effect? Is
No.
this simply, here you go?
Yeah,
That's it? Done?
The county has to cover any administrative costs for doing that land transfer. We still retain any easements through the property. There is a timber reservation placed on it. And so the timber technically still belongs to the beneficiaries and is managed by the department. But we would have to get permission from the county if we want to do a harvest on there. And you're setting it aside as a park, we wouldn't be doing any management. But counties have forgotten that in the past and have managed and harvested timber, and we have to say, hey, that timber revenue goes to the beneficiaries, it doesn't go into your parks budget. And so when these are 50 and 100-year things, people forget over 20 years. And so we have to remind counties of that fact. But
So is reconveyance then our only option that we have to propose as a plan to the DNR board?
for the Cabbage Patch sale and for those short-term sales, right, that we've done that work, we've invested that time and effort to bring these to the board. Reconveyance is the primary tool that the legislature's provided. It's for park purposes only. The county or anybody has the ability, any governmental entity has the ability to do what's called a direct transfer. It's basically a sale. It's the county would buy that piece of property if it weren't county transfer land. And exchange. We can exchange land for land of equal value. All of these things, and even those provisos from the legislature, all recognize that duty that the legislature as the trustee and the department have to keep the beneficiary whole. All of those are buying out the interest of the trust so we can buy replacement lands for those same beneficiaries. So simply setting aside isn't something that's, available to us.
I know we're over time, but there's one more question, and I'd see yours, maybe two more questions. The trust repayment has not come up in this conversation, and I want to ask it while you're here, Dwayne, because someone told me that you had made a comment at a BNR meeting, something about that the trust could be restructured or the debt done, and then somebody made a public comment that they emailed to me about how the law actually says it's no later than 2030 to do the trust rate or the payment reconciliation. So is there any avenue for?
Yeah,
and how much of a burden is that? Like if we wanted to buy some piece of land, it's not a county, because only 13% of the total land is county transfer. So a lot of what we're trying to protect is not reconveyance eligible. So if we wanted to buy something, but you're like, oh, we got to pay back, this trust. When is that when can that be brought to an end?
Yeah, so, and very briefly, on the state forest purchase lands, so the majority of Capitol Forest was lands that were purchased by the department in the 40s and 50s to create a state forest. And so they weren't lands that were owned by the county, weren't tax foreclosures. These were just lands we purchased from private entities. In the 80s, late 80s, early 90s, an audit was done of all of our management accounts. And it was determined that our county funds, we were utilizing federal trust funds to pay for a lot of that management because those lands were cut over, burned over, and et cetera, and weren't generating revenue. And so the legislature determined that we had a debt to pay back to the federally granted trusts. And so at that time, the price tag was in the 70-something millions. And so the legislature and the board came up with a mechanism to pay back that debt with timber. So they said the debt is paid, you're not accruing any more interest on the debt, but you're paid in timber. So the department now has a duty to harvest that timber so that those beneficiaries now can realize that revenue. If we don't harvest that timber because of management choices, not because of regulatory constraints, we have to pay that back in cash. So what we have to do in 2030 is calculate how much of that timber has been harvested, how much remains to be harvested, and then is there only a little bit left so that we can just pay back the rest in cash and transfer those timber rights back to the original landowner? Or do we put forward a plan to continue to harvest? So that's really what the issue is. And so we don't have a plan to do that until 2030 because we are still harvesting on that.
So they get the money from the trees, even if it ends up being that they end up getting 200 million?
Yes,
They got that, and whatever that yields, it's not about accounting that we've paid it back to 70 million.
right. It is that we paid you in timber instead of cash. And they took the risk on that would burn up or would blow down or be, damaged in some other way. Instead of accruing interest in cash, they accrued interest on the growth of the trees. And so that was the bargain that was made, that those trusts said, we'll take timber instead of cash. I will say the University of Washington said, we want the cash. 5 years later, they said, we're not getting any cash, give us timber. So we created a whole nother repayment method that's down in Wahkiakum, Pacific County on their state forest purchase lands that's paying back the university.
So, but what you're saying though is it's irrelevant when the accounting's done because the trees are gonna get cut, period. There's nothing about the accounting that's gonna prevent trees from getting cut.
Correct, because they will just go back to the original trustee and they are all, as we'd like to call it, they're on base for
So
harvest.
it's all been given away essentially.
They're dedicated to the sustainable harvest calculation.
And did Capital State Forest, I mean, this is a side point that irks me, but were we actually the ones, I mean, you said that federal resources were being used for management of not just Capital State Forest, right? Lots of different places. Because you said there were like 5 different places looked at for repayment and 4 of them didn't turn out to be viable. So now it's only Capital State Timber Forest that's paying the debt for the management of other places.
Right, yeah, and it's, again, these weren't county trust lands that came to the state through tax foreclosures. These were lands that the state outright purchased from private individuals. And so that's why the bulk of Capital Forest is still a forest and it wasn't sold off in parcels by Weyerhaeuser and, different small timber companies for housing.
Do you keep track of that stumpage that you do not cut because of landslides, setbacks? Do you keep a running law out of this section of ground? We did not cut, 122 acres.
Yes, we have that data
So
for
if
all
you've
of our
got
lands.
that kind of data and it's legacy type data, why couldn't you get credit for that to meet our needs?
Well,
Would it meet our needs?
I think it's the more the public desire for, those larger intact blocks.
Well,
of
yeah, but
timber
if you
that
can't
are-
get there, can you get
Right.
something? I'm just trying to figure out a way to get something instead of get nothing.
Yeah. That was in one of my earlier PowerPoints, the amount of land that has been conserved even within Thurston County for our riparian protections, et cetera. Because we don't have large reserves of spotted owl habitat or marbled murrelet habitat, other counties, 20-30% of their lands are off base from harvest. In Thurston County, I think it was more like 19% of the lands were
The
off
chair,
base.
the chair didn't tell you this, but I think I ought to tell you, is the sheriff's here for another issue. So,
I'm gonna propose that maybe we stop and the board can chew on, we have a work session to chew on kind of what we talked about today, and then we kind of come up with another, if we have another set of questions, or we kind of continue this. I felt this is the kind of conversation that we need to have. There's just a lot to work through.
No, definitely, and as I've said, you can see how quickly an hour goes by.
Yeah, for sure.
And whether it's smaller groups, what have you.
Yeah, we could do a subcommittee even or something.
I just want to say, I know this is a really complex issue, and I don't know what the answer is, and I'm hoping that we can find a solution that everybody loves, but that'll probably never happen. But I have to, because somebody said something to me last time I was at the Rochester School District office. I understand the conservation needs, but I also want to make sure we're all considering the beneficiary needs and expectations. And if you look at the list of ones that are on hold, there's a lot of jurisdictions that are not very affluent, that are, that, you know, this is a huge source of revenue. When I was pulled into the Rochester School District office and they said, why are you holding up $2 million from our budget? And Rochester School District is not doing very well. It's really important that whatever solution we find, we're making sure that we're considering the beneficiaries as well.
Which I would like to know how, right, with that 2 million, like how they got there and have that breakdown of those beneficiaries and those costs, because, I mean, what we get, right, is, it's not something that we rely on. So I think we need to see what the breakdown of that cost is, because I think Commissioner Menser stated very well. I mean, there hasn't really been a thing where we've actually won, so we haven't really stopped any sales because either, you know, right now these ones are paused, but it's cabbage and carrot, right? But other than that, like, we've just been in this back and forth, and so seeing that breakdown of, I think, benefit from each of the beneficiaries would be helpful for all of us, and it would be helpful for our budget team as well.
It affects our budget quite a bit, because the one I saw that Donnie showed me had county roads, it had all kinds of county stuff listed in there.
Yes, but when we budget, timber sales are so unpredictable that we treat our timber revenue over, specifically in the general fund, I'd set a threshold, and anything above that's considered windfall for the county.
Yeah, and that,
Because it's crazy unpredictable how much is actually gonna come.
yeah, it is, and again, that gets to that, you know, it's very place-based. If I harvest here, even within Capitol Forest, it may be on Common School Trust. And then here, the next year, it will be this. And, you know, for 3 years, we may not be over here by Rochester School District. But when it comes, then it, you know, it may be significant.
This is another topic but I'll tee this up for our next discussion.
Yeah.
I mean, is there any, you know, that whole thing just seems crazy to me. I'm not thrilled by putting, core, things on the backs of trees, period. But if we were gonna do it at a large scale, it seems like it should be done like the school one or wherever, where you just throw it into a pot, you figure out who should get it and divvy it out, not make it this place-based thing.
But this
It
was
just
developed over 150,
Well, right, but so we
120
can,
years, something like that.
so we can fix it. I mean, that's the thing, like, maybe it's time to change it.
And that is,
What we need to
those are the
That would
discussions.
be Legislation.
Lots of things
Exactly.
lots of
Because
things were in
it's
law
tied to
125
property
years ago that
tax.
don't fly anymore.
Yeah, and those are discussions that, in the Wasatch Timber Counties caucus happen
Yeah.
fairly routinely. There are folks that are in favor of a unitary trust.
Yeah, unitary trust.
And
seems
those
more
that are
sensible.
very in favor of,
Yeah. Well, I mean.
as
sure,
many commissioners,
sure,
there are
whoever's-
that many
You
opinions.
gotta put it in the hands of people that aren't directly, you
Right,
know.
yeah, and it does make sense that if revenue were generated anywhere in western Washington on those lands, that it would spread out. It would be less every quarter, but it would be something every quarter.
And you could budget for it, like you say,
It
we
could
can't
be
even budget
reliable.
for it. It's like-
Exactly.
it's kinda- in the library, I mean, library or Port, one of the two that I talked to, they were the same way. It's like, we can't even budget, we can't really even use it because we can't know what's coming, so we can't actually hire people or
Right.
enter into contract. All the things that we do as local government require a stable, steady source of funding.
Right, and
It's
it,
not that useful to someone to get,
right, it's the windfall, and then you have to, determine how you're gonna use that 1.5 million. Though Rochester School District has let us know, they want that revenue.
is that the Cabbage Patch that they're,
It's through a number of sales.
because that's the only sale we've really been touching on and.
Well, and we'll provide that,
So I was surprised. by
that information that we have, because there are a number that, again, we have paused
Okay.
because of those discussions. Juneau is still paused, Cabbage Patch, Carrot, Delica, but then even, the analysis for Star Wagon and Chai and Bears and Evergreen Gold, right? All of the sales that you put on your priority list and are incorporated in that 1,900 acres you know, many of those were sales that are, either would have already been sold, and so the revenue would be going to those junior taxing districts. Again, it was in our 2-year plan.
Unfortunately, we're gonna have to let you go.
Yep.
I really,
Keep going, I'm sure.
I know that we're over time, but I am curious about the maps that they brought.
brought them out for us.
They brought a number of maps.
There's, just showing timber sales that are planned, and then one showing Thurston County, and then the different, trust areas. So,
This quarterly meeting you're talking about, that's the kind of thing we could,
yeah, I mean, that would be easier to look at a table and kind of discuss.
We could probably just leave it with
That
you
would be
guys.
Yeah, if you
wonderful.
guys
If you
have
could leave
maps,
those with
that'd be
us so we can take a look at them.
Absolutely.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you.
Just consider a huge giraffe
I just,
and then like a watermark on it.
we're on the
I know how
brains
important you are, I
behind the
see you,
whole
I see
thing.
you everywhere.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thanks, everyone.
Yep, thank y'all.
Sarah, I'll connect with you to set up the next one.
Awesome, let's,
Thank you.
list of things to talk.
All right. Come on up, Sheriff team.
Get the flock over here. No? Yeah, you like that?
Good one.
So I understand that we ran over a bit in the DNR, but we have also teed up for this afternoon the makeup session for the Lake Bottom, and we have the attorney set up for that. And we have, I know various commissioners have other commitments that start before 4:30, so.
What's the time estimate on this one that we were expecting?
Well, the sheriff, as you can see, has provided a substantial PowerPoint. And I don't know if the board would like to go ahead and go through that, given your direction
Well,
to the sheriff.
let's maybe pivot to my seatmates. Who has to leave when?
I have to leave at like 3:30.
I have to leave at like 3:50 at the latest. I have to be at Lacey City Hall at 4.
The alternate for RHC, so.
Well, we can kick the executive session or not.
We can
Let's give the rest of
reschedule
the
that
time to the
again
sheriff
if you'd
and-
like.
And let's just.
I also, without the vendor here, I think we'll be pretty condensed.
Okay.
Because there's a number of questions that I'm gonna say I don't know.
And then you can follow up and
And
then,
then, again, it's more, I think the bigger thing I wanna get to today is what questions do you have? Because I'm fairly well educated on a number of things. Yes, Commissioner?
I just kind of want to be realistic. We had a conversation yesterday, and while we're going to hear about this, I think we should also be very honest with the sheriff on like where we're at. And the fact that we're going to be undergoing negotiations really quickly, and there were some concerns from board members. And so I just laid out there that we're tight. And
I
our
don't know.
general outlook is, so I just,
that's 100% true, but I don't know what this is or what it costs or what it can do. So I'm, just as an initial, certainly everything Commissioner Mejia said is accurate. We're
The issue
concerned
could
about
be-
getting ahead of expenditures before
Yeah.
contracts are dealt
Certainly.
with and all that.
One of the other things
But
too
these
that I think
things
needs to
could
be
be
discussed though is like,
Budgeted already.
the county has not communicated any budget constraints to us. So when we're looking at what we're doing, we're looking at the public safety tax and the non-supplanting and all those things and the filling of positions, and we're just assuming that, because there's been no communication about, oh, by the way, we're using the public safety tax for these things. So we're, on our side of things, we already have things earmarked like, hey, we're running an overtime-based agency, so we recognize we're probably gonna be absorbing overtime in public safety tax and things like that. And I think a sizable amount has already been authorized, from the previous, budget deliberations. But when we're going through this, like right now, it shows that we have a couple $100,000, basically that's going to be undoubtedly in vacancy savings this year from Proposition 1. So when we're projecting all of this, the county has not communicated any kind of, by the way, that's earmarked, we're using that for something. So that's, I think, maybe some of the other confusion as well. So when we start looking at things like, when I'm working with Heidi, And we're working through things like, what can we afford? Can we afford double overtime? From our perspective, we can, but that's because the county has not communicated, oh, by the way, we're using that for this, or we're covering existing costs with that. So I think that's part of the miscommunication as well. So when we're going through all these different things, and I'll present this stuff very quickly, but that might be a huge gap, because we have things that we're trying to cover that we know we have to pay for. And we have not heard anything from finance on the county side as far as we're using that money.
And let me clarify, these conversations took place yesterday with the board. So this is brand new, and that's why I was like, I just want to be upfront right now and say there's budgetary concerns.
Yeah.
And so I guess I'll just be straight through, like, I'll hear about this, but just with that information that got relayed to the board yesterday, we're gonna be really tightening everywhere. I've gone through the presentation, so thank you for providing that beforehand, right? And I've already seen the prices for that, and just even that, I understand that, you know, you're going through kind of the estimates, and we were willing to hear that, and then we got some information yesterday, and now I'm relaying, it's just there's some concerns there. So
Yeah.
I wanted to be upfront with you, just
Yeah.
as a heads up that.
And these items are contingent on not filling our positions. So that is the estimate, right? It was one of these things where the vacancy savings does nothing for the county. So even if it required holding one position, then we funded one of these objects, at least for a year, to figure out if it's something that's feasible in the future. So, anyways, moving forward, I will just give a brief update. So as most of you know, Initiative 2113 was adopted by the legislator. It was a citizen-led initiative to restore vehicular pursuit authority to law enforcement in Washington State. From everything that I saw, there was a lot of support behind that. I mean, the line to testify in favor up at the Capitol was pretty much out the door. And so the legislator ultimately decided to just act on it instead of letting it go to a vote of the people. So on June 6th at midnight, the laws regarding pursuit restrictions will change. And they've gone over a number of changes throughout the last couple of years. In 2021, they made the initial change was that police officers could not pursue vehicles unless they had probable cause for a violent felony, sex offense, escape, or reasonable suspicion of DUI. In 2022, no changes were made, I believe. And then in 2023, I was elected, I testified, I wanted some domestic violence crimes added to that. They added assault, fourth-degree domestic violence, so they added one misdemeanor to that crime list. And then they changed it to allow pursuits for reasonable suspicion of any of those select crimes. With that being said, you know, it led to a number of issues on the law enforcement side as far as capturing people. Commissioner Mejia, you were with me in the ride-along when the stolen car drove past us, and you're like, but it's stolen. And I'm like, yeah, I know, but they're not pulling over, so it's off in the wind. And in that time frame, we saw just certain categories of crime exploded, and there's a lot of debate about whether or not it was because of that, but it was very ironic that auto theft and all these things that, you know, we would turn our lights on and turn them back off for just continued to rise throughout the years. We're actually at the point now where Washington State ranks top 3 in the entire country for auto theft, both per capita and in raw numbers. So we're not doing good in those areas. Initiative 2113, there was a lot of laws that changed with the pursuit stuff that we didn't have any issues with in law enforcement. Things like requiring EVOC training. The county already did that, but there are small agencies that didn't provide their officers training on pursuit driving, but then they were out pursuing cars. So we saw some of the conflict. That's now codified. So that's now part of state law. You have to have all these different pieces of training. There's pieces in the law that are staying that talk about the need to notify neighboring jurisdictions. So you can't just pursue a car into Pierce County and not tell them. Again, these were already best practices, but now they're codified. So the whole state is working on the same playing field. The two biggest changes that are coming to the law is, one, the threshold to pursue a vehicle has dropped from I think it's an immediate or a substantial risk of public safety down to poses a safety risk, period. So it's opened the door for pursuits to occur again. And then the second thing is that they've changed it from that very narrow list of violent felonies and sex offense and escapes and DUI to any law violation. So that can range from the person blew a stop sign and now they're running from us to murder first degree. So the entire range of pursuits is back open for each agency in the state to determine what best fits for their population. So as we're working on going back and looking at our pursuit policy and all these different things, there is a large concern that come June, the light is going to change, and all of a sudden, all the cars that have been fleeing from us every night, we usually have about anywhere from 1 to 10 cars a day that flee law enforcement, that all of a sudden, those vehicles may be pursued now. And the discretion will be up to the deputy on the time of day, the traffic, the reason for the pursuit, all those kinds of things. And so, these 3 items that we're going to talk about today, we were already working toward. But now that, just because we're able to pursue cars again, doesn't mean that we just want to go out and pursue cars all day long and present these risks to the public, when there are pieces of technology that can help us mitigate some of that risk. So, the first one that kind of touches pursuits, but not so much, is the Flock license plate reader cameras. So we've reached out to Flock. They gave us a presentation. We felt pretty thrilled with the price point of it. I think for 20 cameras, it was approximately $50,000, $55,000 a year. And that was everything included. So that included the installation, that included the equipment. So if one of the cameras gets damaged or it falls off or a wind knocks it off, they come and replace. It's all covered under that contract. And essentially what the Flock cameras do is you put them up at different locations in the county. We've been working with both IT, legal coming up, and Public Works, county shops, to talk about placement of the cameras and where they can and can't go. And essentially what they do is, as cars drive through, obviously it's just like having a police officer behind your vehicle. Run the plate, nothing comes back, non-issue. Run the plate, comes back stolen, we get a hit. And so there are a number of agencies across the entire state that have had a great deal of success with these. They're just, it's one of those things in law enforcement where when something starts working, we hear about it amongst elected sheriffs and chiefs. Yakima has been basically the long-standing unit that's had them. And they have a number of success stories that they'll talk about, the kidnapping victim who was located within, 5 minutes because the Flock cameras kept hitting throughout the county and notifying law enforcement of where the vehicle was driving through. Amber and silver alerts, so when we have missing kids or kidnapped kids or missing adults, we can enter those plates and they'll get Flock hits. So Lakewood, that's a good example. We recently had a homicide up on Cooper Point Road where a female was murdered and then burned in a residence. And based on where we projected to put these cameras, our suspect vehicle would have driven through that. We could have filed back through there and said, oh, yep, there's our car. However, we did get Flock hits when we called Lakewood. So we gave Lakewood the BOLO. Lakewood ran the plate. It came through in a Flock hit. We were able to actually then track those individuals to a shoplifting incident that occurred at a Lakewood Walmart. And all of a sudden, you've got suspects. Without these, then we start to see the cold cases, like we've seen back in the day. So the cameras work on 2 different kind of primary functions. There's one where it's just set up to filter things. So stolen cars, drivers who have felony warrants, things like that. And as law enforcement is driving around, it's just like running a plate. It sends a hit to your screen, notifies you which camera has picked up the vehicle, and then law enforcement can respond to the area and search for the vehicle. So stolen car, felony warrant suspect, that kind of thing. The second piece, it allows agency members to enter places of interest. So if we responded to, let's say, a violent robbery, and we show up and we know that we have a plate, well, then we can then enter that plate in real time into the security system, and it will actually start sending flags if it drives through any of the locations that have cameras. So as you can see, that would be extremely helpful when we talk about trying to locate vehicles. We had another vehicular potential homicide, ended up not being a homicide in Yelm. Same thing, if we would have had the Flock camera at the location where we projected it to be at, would have been very helpful to say that we know the vehicle didn't go into Pierce County, because as soon as we got on scene, we entered the characteristics of the vehicle and it never flagged going into Pierce County. The vehicle actually drove further into Yelm, but we all assumed based on addresses, so we had a whole search party up in Pierce County for 3 hours and the car never went there. Go ahead.
Sorry, can I just, who's getting it, like, when it dings, like, who is getting dinged? Is it like a main computer, or is it like going to each of the officers who are on patrol, like, who's?
It's the on-duty officer, so anyone who's signed in to their MCT when they're out patrolling. The other thing about the Flock system that I think has made it so attractive is it's interconnected throughout the state. So, Olympia Police Department is, I believe, I just heard that their city council has approved them. So they'll start putting them in the city of Olympia. If Thurston County joins in, all of us will get hits on Flock
Tenino's buying
simultaneously.
3 or
Tenino gets a few, we'll get hits from Tenino, and then you basically, there's a little button that you check that says, yeah, we're willing to share with our local jurisdictions, and everyone does, for that reason, so.
I mean, it seems like a good tool for police work in general, but you were making a connection about pursuit safety. How does it connect really to pursuits?
This is the one that connects the least, but at least in a scenario where you do terminate a pursuit, it's more helpful right now where we don't pursue vehicles, but,
Yeah.
right now, if you terminate a pursuit, you could at least see where the vehicle continues to go. And that's the whole issue with a pursuit, is that if you don't see where the person goes, you lose them. But if you terminate a pursuit, let's say in Lacey, and then you get a ding in Tumwater, and then you get a ding in
Drive a
Yelm,
little less crazy to
you
track
can
them
just
because
keep driving through the
Can't
area.
outrun the camera.
the camera's gonna keep
Correct.
digging out.
Correct. So, that's how it really related to the pursuit stuff. And it relates more to the pursuit stuff, the more cameras you have. We're on the low end, of what we're looking to purchase. So, you could purchase 500 cameras in the county. And then sure, it might be more helpful, but what we're really focusing on is the main arterial roads, the main choke points throughout the county.
I know this is a little bit of a side point, but I'm really interested in the pursuit security stuff. Because when the pursuit laws were passed, I just I didn't track them that much, and I really assumed that they were about maybe institutional racism and stuff like that. Like if it's not necessary, then taking that discretion away, something like that. Then I saw in the debates over reinstituting them, the statistics on like how many people get killed and what percentage of those people are innocent and stuff.
Right.
Across the country, not anywhere local, but it's pretty shocking stats on like people that get hurt during police pursuits. So I kind of got it, why there was this, we have to sort of strike this balance. So anything we can do with technology to make things safer.
But then you look at the amount of
My
people
mind's
that get
open to
hurt by not arresting people.
Well, that's what I'm
too,
saying,
you know, like they-
but when you see the stats, it's like
Yeah.
5,500 people got killed. I was like, did 5,500 people, did that save 5,500 lives? I mean,
And
it was a big enough number that you actually asked that
The
question
tough
to
part
yourself.
for us is again, like, and that's why law enforcement, I have to worry about my scope and my control, but law enforcement in Washington State is so far ahead of what some other states are doing when it comes to even just, you go to, there's areas like, North Carolina that don't train pit. So they just chase the car until it stops.
They're crazy.
And I'm like, that's terrible. That's a terrible practice. We want to pit the car. We want to get that done as soon as possible and get this person stopped. Because what makes the pursuit dangerous is it continues to go on for so long. It's the duration of the pursuit. And so, looking at all of this, that is, and as someone gave me those numbers and I went and I separated out Washington State.
Yeah.
And Washington State was responsible for less than 1% of those deaths. I think in the same time frame, we had like 25 people killed. And it was over like a 5-year period of time, there was 5,500
I think
deaths.
it was Olympian. It was somewhere I read it. It was testimony that was given at the.
Yes,
At the
yeah, and they
CJA.
used the national data, but then when we
Yeah.
actually single out Washington,
We can't conflate national data with Washington data because the way we regulate police officers is way ahead of anywhere else in the country.
and that's kind of the problem. Like, one of the number one areas where people are killed is Houston. Houston PD will chase the absolute wheels off of everyone through downtown Houston. And I think they average more than like 100 to 200 pedestrian deaths a year. Which is crazy to me. Like, it's clearly not outweighing the risk and reward
Right, that's
there.
what I was saying. I mean, I see
Whereas
that
like,
stuff.
you're not gonna find Olympia Police Department pursuing someone for no turn signal through downtown Olympia. You'll never see it in the history of,
I want to
Time here.
learn more and I'd love to know how it affects IT, if at all, if we end up going with these technologies, but.
yeah. Commissioner, thanks, Wayne.
Thank you. I was gonna ask in terms of public records and fiber connectivity, and like, where you put the cameras at, does it have to have fiber connectivity, or is it gonna be kind of like uploading like the body cam system where, the officer has to go somewhere and wait there, or, where is it, all this data offloading?
So the way that it works, the cameras are completely self-sustainable. So they're solar powered, so they do not require any tapping into existing infrastructure whatsoever. There's also no physical internet connection, and they run on cellular data. So I think they have contracts with Verizon and AT&T is what they said. So, that is a limit of where you can put the camera, but most of Thurston County has cell service at this point, at least most of the areas that we would be interested in putting the cameras. The data itself is stored for 30 days, so what it does is as it's going through, it basically just takes a picture of the vehicle. They don't capture faces, it's just a vehicle profile. And then for 30 days, that data is just stored at Flock. So Flock just keeps the photos of the vehicles, and then we can go back 30 days and access that. So if you took a homicide 10 days ago, and you know that it's a green Honda Civic, you can go back in there and start filtering through. Well, I know that the house was here, and I wonder if it drove through any of these cameras. And one of the things that makes Flock very unique and more palpable, I think, is that it's not just a license plate reader technology, they also do vehicle profile technology. So a lot of people have just decided they're just not gonna drive with plates on their cars because it's stolen. So why do I want you to know it's stolen? So we see a lot of vehicles right now driving around without license plates. Flock can do vehicle profile. So they can say, you're looking for a Honda Civic from a 2001 to a 2004 model that's green. It's got a bumper sticker on the back and a spoiler. Those are all filters. So you can go through and filter out the very specific vehicle that you're looking for. The data is stored for 30 days on Flock servers. At that point in time, it is not a PDR-able issue for us. So it is not a PDR-able document that's discoverable through Thurston County until we pull the document. So if we have a murder suspect that we've located through Flock and we access that information, then it gets saved and it becomes our PDR-able document.
Okay. I'm wondering, so then, and I guess it's more question for IT, right? It's like, then what happens when there's a case and it goes to the prosecutor and then they have to do all of their thing. And I'm learning back from history of Axon, which is where I feel like I smacked my teeth in that, right? Because we're now paying for that program, for them to have access to it. So it's, once it goes to the prosecutor, right, and like, is there going to be, I guess, I'm looking at Robin, because this is gonna be more for IT, like, what is gonna be their needs in terms of, are they gonna need more cloud service that was,
I think that's something that Sherry's looking into, and
We're working with Sherry.
you're working with her now.
It
So,
should be a digital photo
It's
is
a
what
photo.
a digital photo is what we're capturing on our end of it and.
So it's
relating
not the video of it kind of
There's
No
no
crossing?
video.
There's no video.
So it's,
It is just a camera. It doesn't have any video recording possibilities. So when we capture the murder suspect driving through, we will obtain that document as proof that this is the vehicle it drove through at this time. Detectives then will go get their search warrant to geolocate the fence of the warrant for any kind of cell phones in the area, and then that's where the evidence will be used. And then it will be uploaded just like a deputy who's taken a photo at a crime scene.
So now, being the defense counsel, they're gonna wanna say, well, how many other 2002 Hondas went through here in the period of time that you're allotting that maybe the suspect did? Who is there a responsibility to capture that information, give that information up, probably take a court order or something? I don't know, but what's the agencies around the country that have this? What's their experience when it comes to a more serious crime and a lapse of time between the crime and when it could have went through? So now defense wants, I want to see all the cars that were going north on 101. So that's the kind of thing we ran into with the cameras,
Yeah, and that's ultimately, these items in themselves aren't evidence of any one particular
Well,
thing.
no,
They're
they
clues.
put you on-
They're
they
clues. They
put
give
you
you a
after
direction. Yeah.
my client.
So when a detective goes through and says, I want every green Honda Civic that drove through here, yeah, they're gonna pull all those photos. All of those photos are then gonna be part of that collection. And defense is gonna be able to go, well, what about this one and this one? And that's ultimately the job of the detective to say, here's why it isn't. Because we did all these other things. You're right. If that were the only piece, the case would certainly fall apart.
I'm just wondering, do you have any experience? Because it might end up to where defense has a mechanism to, well, hey, I got my client off because I did this.
Sure. It won't put us any worse than where we are today as
No,
far as, it's
but
just, it's a lead for us to
I'm
pursue.
just curious if there's been that kind of manipulation of the system yet.
The vendor has mentioned some cases in Yakima where they got homicide suspects and kidnapping suspects, so, that would, I think was part of the presentation part, that there was some information there. I haven't seen the flock presentation.
Usually those, like a homicide doesn't go to trial for 2 years anyway, so if it's all brand new, how long do you have to save this stuff? Oh, this wasn't available, because it goes away in 30 days. I don't know, I like the idea, I like the concept, but I'd sure wanna know the whole picture.
Did you have a?
Yeah, well, it sounds like we're probably not gonna have time to get to everyone's questions today, but, I had some concerns about the centralized database and who that's available to. Looking into Flock, it appears that any private person in the community can also own a Flock system. They can purchase it, and then they're part of this centralized database, and they can access any information that's a part of that. Okay,
So so one of the cool things that Flock does is, let's say that there's a business in our county that just can't shake themselves of criminal activity. Like, there's a couple hotels I can think of that have been really trying, but they're like, our prices attract problems. They can partner with the agency in their county and say, we're gonna buy a camera for Flock, and then the information still goes just to the law enforcement agency. So that's what they mean by, let's say Motel 6 decides that we want one of these license plate readers so that when a stolen car shows up here. That's fine, they'll get with Flock, they'll figure out where to put it, but then it still ties into our system. They don't have any actual access. The camera is it's basically them just investing in the program and having it installed on their property. Only certified law enforcement officers, investigators actually get the data.
okay. That's not what I've read when I've looked into it, so I'll have to look into that probably a little bit more to find
Yep.
out, because that was a big concern for me, was like the over surveillance, and it's accessible to anybody who wants it. Like, anyone can put in a records request and get this information, and that's a big concern to me, as well as like the lack of regulation around this kind of system in Washington State. There's no checks and balances in place to say, hey, you said you committed to 30 days of storing this information. There's no regulatory authority over that that's saying, like, we need to make sure that you're only keeping it for 30 days. So who's holding Flock accountable to what they say they're gonna do in terms of privacy and storing data?
Yeah, I would, and just looking at Flock as a business perspective, it's very expensive to hold on to this data. So I think that part of it too, and I don't, that's why Flock will have to answer those questions, but I would think that their business model would also preclude them from hanging on to this data for too long, because if you think about how many how many photos are being snapped every day, let's say 35,000 cars per camera per day, every day. So at some point in time, they're gonna have to keep pumping money into terabytes of data in order to keep all that. So I think there's also a business incentive on the capitalism side of things for them, but that will be a question for Flock, absolutely.
Okay. And then I also had concerns about like the accuracy. I was reading a little bit about some specific examples of Flock being used, and there were some like inaccurate captures of the license plate and the way that it was transcribed, and that has actually caused to a lot of violent arrests of people who were innocent. So I'd be concerned, because it is a newer system, about like the accuracy and how we can really know that we can trust the information that it's providing.
Yeah, and the what I would say is that sounds like a training issue on the law enforcement side, because all that Flock is doing is notifying you of something that is driven through its camera. It is still the job of the law enforcement officer to go through and say, radio, copy a plate. Go ahead. And they verify the plate, and they say Capcom Adam, which means stolen car in our county. So, that sounds like more of a training problem, because for us in anything that we do, I've driven past a car and got the wrong plate by one letter, and it comes back as stolen, and I flip around on it. I don't just go pit it and then, violently take people into custody. I get the plate again, because I'm like, oh, I want to verify this, and we verify all of our stolen cars through dispatch. So that's going to be more of a policy, procedure, training, and upholding all of those things that we currently do. But it is a valid concern.
Okay.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah, I see you.
Go ahead.
Are you okay?
I'll write my question down for later.
Commissioner
Um,
Fournier, go ahead.
I wanted to comment on Commissioner Klaus's two concerns. I guess I'd want to know, like, what all data, would be of concern, because if the camera system is just recording license plates and, that's what's being put out on some system, that's all the same information that any person can get on a scanner or an app on their phone when they listen to the radio. That's all open to the public when the sheriff's out doing their business. And then regarding like discrepancies, I would guess that a camera system is much more accurate than eyewitness accounts, which are relied on every day and horribly unreliable. So to me, it's a way to nail things down and cut out variables almost.
I don't know where this fits, but I had a case as a lawyer, people that would abuse protection orders between each other. One case I remember where somebody lived in downtown Centralia, and my client, I represented the client, was accused of stalking this person, and the library was a block and a half away from this person's house, and her lawyer's office was a block from this person's house. So she was saying, I've seen this person drive by my house every day. I mean, there was other stuff too, but
Yeah.
it was added to that, and it was just like, I could see how that person's gonna go after this camera footage and gonna have, that's neither here nor there, but they're gonna go through weeks of footage to try to show how many times X person drove by their house. Now, maybe that could be a good thing in a real DV stalking case, but there's a lot of cases that are just people just trying to get at each other.
And none of those documents
law,
are
divorce
our
cases.
documents. Those documents belong to Flock.
But
And-
I'm
and
saying
Flock-
somebody could go and ask for
Flock
that.
does not have the same, they're a private company. They do not have the same public disclosure. It becomes a public document the moment law enforcement takes it from the server to look at it. That's when it becomes a public
Do they
document.
sell those images to the public?
No, they do not.
They work only with local.
They only work with law enforcement.
I would push back a little bit on that. I don't know, I can't say 100%, but I can say I have read articles that say otherwise. So that is a point I would really want to clarify, just because that would be really scary if like anybody could just request this information, and we have neighbors spying on each other, and that would be really unsafe for a lot of people.
We can verify with Flock, but that's what they told me.
Okay.
And I'll be perfectly frank, if Flock were taking these photos and selling them, then we wouldn't be entertaining you guys right now, because that's not gonna be beneficial to anyone. However, in agreement with Commissioner Fournier, this material, this is the exact same material you can get driving around, because Flock doesn't have access to criminal databases. All they're doing is it's linking up on the back end and sending the plates through our system we have the access to the criminal justice database that contains information about stolen cars, felony warrants, Amber Alerts, Silver Alerts, those kinds of things. So Flock as an entity doesn't have any of that. All the camera is doing is taking a picture of the plate, writing the numbers out and sending it to our computer, and then our computers are the ones that are actually running these things as they go.
There's way more efficient ways to spy on your neighbors than requesting information about license plates. You've got DOT cameras, you've got social media, you've got Ring cameras all over everyone's homes. There's way better ways to spy.
That's true. So it's 3:50. We have other stuff that you're gonna
Yeah.
go through.
If you have any other questions, can you please make sure that you send them to me so I can get those to Flock?
Definitely,
yeah.
yeah. Are you gonna be going through the next presentation about the other two pieces of equipment today, or are we gonna postpone that since people have to leave?
I'll go over them, but I'm more than happy to meet with you individually if you want to go over them as well.
Okay.
These items are very, very simple, and they deal directly with pursuit mitigation, so
Okay.
they're not as complex as Flock and the databases and stuff like that, so.
Okay.
And hopefully in the PowerPoint that was presented, if you click on some of those links to the videos, you'll see exactly what they do 100%.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Sorry we all have to take off.
No, it's all good. So the next two items deal directly with pursuit mitigation. So one of those items I'll start with is the grappler. It's the most just fundamental. It's very, very basic in how it works. It is a device, it's a push bar device on the front of our vehicles, so it would replace the Satina, big push bumpers on there. And instead, it is a net that folds down, which then is driven under the rear wheel of one of the suspect vehicles that's fleeing, and a net wraps up and entangles the suspect vehicle. And then it's got two modes. It's got one where the suspect vehicle is then still connected by a tow strap, basically, between the patrol vehicle and the suspect vehicle. And then there's basically a release switch in case, you're pulling you got a diesel and it's still pulling you, that you can release the strap so you don't get tugged along, kind of thing. There's a ton of videos on the internet. I mean, we could demonstrate it for you, but those devices we're trying to
Goes on
basically.
every car or something?
It wouldn't go on every car. We would spread them out throughout the county, and really the idea then is that at least if some of the cars have them, because they're about, all things considered, I think they're about $7,000 a vehicle, but they're transferable, so they don't, you don't buy them brand new for every single car and then get rid of them. You move them along to each vehicle, and so those ones look extremely effective. We're having some supply chain issues with them when we even inquire about getting a few, because they've been so successful in Arizona, which is the area they're based out of. The Arizona State Patrol and Phoenix Police Department have almost bought the company out, basically. So we're finding so much success with getting these vehicles stopped that we're just kind of on a wait list right this moment. We're working with the auditor to secure sole source, but we plan on purchasing a few of them to at least start demoing them around the county.
So have you worked with Bruce Rohroth since it would need to go through ER&R?
Oh, yeah, that's what we started with.
Can you talk a little more about like how it works, how does it work? Like how close do you have to get to how does it function?
You have to get probably within 5 or 6 feet of the suspect vehicle. You're pretty much right up behind them.
But you're thinking that it'll shorten the pursuit because if you get close enough, you deploy that, then you're not.
Yeah,
It's done.
and it's done. The pursuit's ended. Once you get a successful deployment on the grappler, they're not going anywhere. And there's been a number of instances. One of the things that we're finding right now is that we're conducting pit maneuvers on these vehicles, and they're not giving up. And that's been kind of a strange thing. During my career as a deputy, you pit a car and they were like, okay, I got spun around, I'm done. Now it's ram. It's reverse, forward, on the sidewalk, through the woods, whatever they can do. Exactly, and it's just repeatedly. I mean, we just lost, one of our deputies just got their car back from that F-350 pursuit where it was damaged, gets their car back, they get in a pursuit for a DUI, he's going 10 miles an hour on rims down I-5, and he does the absolute softest pit maneuver I've ever seen, no damage, just barely gets the car turned around. Car gets a little bit of traction, rams a deputy head on, backs into him, smashes 2 door panels, and tries to take off again and then that's when we pushed it off into the woods. They're not giving up, and that's been kind of a concerning trend for us because we used to pit cars and they'd give up, and now it's like they get spun around and they start the car back up and try to keep going. So it's led to a lot of damaged vehicles over the last couple years. So the grappler, it's just a net device that just runs right up underneath the rear tire of the suspect vehicle, and then the patrol unit backs off, it gets tangled up and snaps tight. And so not only does it disable the axle, but then it also is still connected to a patrol car. So the patrol unit can also, hit the brakes and slow the suspect vehicle down. So as far as guaranteeing that a pursuit ends immediately, there isn't a better piece of technology out there as far as mechanical. The next unit that we are looking at that has been more open and more available to us getting is called Star Chase. This is a unit that includes a small launcher that affixes to the existing push bumpers on our cars, and it's got 2 shots and they're little GPS sticky darts. So as the suspect vehicle is fleeing, a county unit can pull up behind it and shoot the dart. It has an up and down aim ability. So if you've got a lifted truck, you can aim up for a tailgate. If you've got a lowered Honda, you can aim down for a bumper. And it's got a laser that's attached to it so that the deputy can see. They tag the vehicle, and that immediately corresponds to a web-based program that shows the GPS location of that vehicle. So that one is more of a, you tag the vehicle and you back off and you turn your lights and sirens off. I think the theory that suspects stop driving recklessly after the police turn their lights off has been proven to be false now over the last couple of years and all the footage that we've seen, but at least we're not behind the car. So we turn our lights off, the vehicle drives around. Every unit, every patrol unit has that ability to see where the GPS location of that vehicle is. And then essentially the goal there is to wait until the vehicle comes to a park and then converge on it.
And how much does this cost?
That one is about the same price,
As Grappler?
as the Grappler. Yeah, so the Grappler, I think, each net is dispensable on the Grappler, and those are $250 a net. The Star Chase platform is a little bit different. You pay for the installation in the unit on the car, and then I think it was an annual fee of $1,500 a car.
Yeah.
Yes. $1,500 a car, and that includes unlimited darts, so you can shoot as many cars flee, you can shoot as many darts as you need to.
Are they one-time uses?
The darts, they are one-time use, and then they ask that you send them back so they can send you training aids, as a replacement. And then you get 2 chances for every deployment to stick to the
I
car.
think we're about to lose our quorum here. Mr. Mejia has to leave, so
Yeah.
maybe we can just, board can talk about this and.
Yep.
Sounds like good, interesting stuff to consider.
Yeah, the big thing to note is that on June 6th, I mean,
Pursuits are gonna change.
pursuits are going to change in this entire state. And it's that first couple of months that I'm obviously very concerned about with the number of cars that continue to flee. So, we think that over time, the mentality will change. Before the law changed, very few cars fled, the sheriff's office. We would have maybe one every 2 weeks.
You still use stop sticks?
Yes, we do. The only issue with stop sticks is the amount of police officers who are dying deploying them. So we stop stick a lot of cars still, but I try to tell our deputies, you need to find hard permeable cover. Because standing out in the middle of the road, I mean, we've had three officers that I know of that have died in just the last couple of years.
What are stop sticks?
Spike strips. So that's where
Spike strips,
they're
okay.
throwing the sticks across the road.
I thought you said stop, I was like.
Stop Sticks is the
what?
brand.
Stop Sticks is the company.
I was like,
So-
what is, okay.
How many of those, flock cameras is Olympia putting out, do you know?
It's population based, so I think they're putting out approximately the same number that we were. Basically, the way that their business model works is I'm like, well, how many cameras do we have to be able to tie into everybody else? And they said it's based on population. So for us, it was a minimum of 20. For OPD, it's probably gonna be 15 or so is the minimum. But what we've told them is, hey, we're not gonna put any cameras near the city of Olympia because we don't wanna overlap our efforts. So we'll focus on county locations.
So if you pick a location like an intersection, does it have to be like 4 of them on each side, or is it one?
It could be.
Depends
Yeah.
on the intersection, how it's made up, yeah.
It's up,
Say
it's up to
20,
the
that
person.
might only be 5 spots or something, or 10.
Should be more than
For
that.
us, we are doing one per location because we're so spread out. So like, for instance, one of the areas that I wanted was, the county line at 507 because that's the back door to Pierce County and we're having a lot of shootings in Yelm. And so what we're interested in is people coming into our county. People leaving our county,
Strategically, you
we're
might
trying to
only need one.
strategically plan out, and we've worked with, the shops to pick out those locations, Public Works. So we've got all the locations mapped out, of where we would put them.
Commissioner Fournier?
Sorry, Sheriff Sanders, I think you basically just touched on it, but I saw a presentation you gave where you were talking about just the amount of, I guess, visitors we would get in North Thurston County, Lacey area from Pierce County, and how you felt like a lot of the criminal activity was coming from outside of Thurston County, and so by covering some of these entrances and exits, you'd be able to use this camera to determine, well, I guess where it's coming from and who did certain things.
We know that the crime is coming from Pierce County, and it's overflowing across that border. Between the juveniles stealing cars in Tacoma and coming down here to commit more crimes, a good portion of our serious crime is coming from Pierce County. If you took any robbery between the hours of 11 a.m. and, 6 a.m., I would bet my next paycheck that they flee towards Pierce County. That was the running joke. If you ever take a robbery in Thurston County, I would just go drive to I-5 at Martin Way, where it ends there in the valley, and wait, and there goes the suspect, almost every time. So that was one of our camera locations, was the Martin Way exit to I-5. They hit that hill, and you can hit that hill at about 130 miles an hour and go right through the green light and merge onto I-5. So,
Okay, thank you. And the experience is similar in South Thurston County, where there's a lot of, there's a lot of folks coming up from Lewis County to steal cars, burglarize houses, and things of that nature.
Yep, I mean, the county line is the county line. In a number of ways, there's always been this concept that, well, police can't chase across county lines. That part's not true, but the part that is true is that communication is difficult across county lines. You break agencies, and all of a sudden, we don't have the same report writing systems, we don't have the same frequencies that we're talking on. So there is some validity by going from jurisdiction to commit crimes. And really what we rely on is those fusion centers to keep us all aligned with crime trends. And hey, like that was the same thing with the Kia boys who smashed out 30 windows at Amazon, that we ended up deploying stop sticks and getting in a foot chase with them. They've been doing that all up and down the I-5 corridor. They were able to tie them to like 7 different mass vehicle prowls, stealing guns from cars. So, it's this hopping.
But with this system, you'd be able to follow them via the camera system into Pierce County, all right? You'd be able to use the flock system to tag these cars as they left the county, and there's several other jurisdictions around us that have this system already that would be tied into, so you'd be able to essentially follow them home.
Yep, yeah, Lakewood's got them. I know that Pierce County was looking at them. Yakima, Centralia PD has them. Olympia,
Lewis County's got quite a few, I believe.
yeah, Olympia and Yelm's looking at it, but Olympia and Tumwater are both getting them. Lacey was kind of on the fence, from what I was told, and so I mean, one way or another. I think these cameras they're ending up in our county. The question is whether we're going to be part of that network or not.
Don't forget the McKenna Bridge.
That's on the list.
That was the one that we had on the list of people coming in.
Are they owned by Flock?
Yes.
Like if some anarchists come and decide to destroy them all, that's not on us?
A Flock, the price includes replacement.
Replacement.
Yeah.
All right, are we done for this session? We've got Commissioner Klaus is back on Zoom. Any questions?
I am, but I have to pop off now, so I don't have any other questions at this time.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We're gonna bring this movie. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you.